What we're going to do today is take a look at how to solve quadratic equations. We're actually going to look at a couple different methods because for some of you, you may prefer factoring and for some of you, you may not. And so at this point after algebra, it doesn't matter what method you choose as long as you can come up with the solutions. So we're going to take a look at a bunch of different methods. So this may be one of the longer videos, but hopefully by the end you'll have a method that you prefer. So today we talked about factoring in class, and if we take a look at this problem right here, solved by factoring, the first thing that we want to do is take this expression, x squared plus 2x minus 3, and first of all you want to make sure that it's set equal to 0, so you should combine all your like terms and everything on one side of the equation so that it's set equal to 0. And then once that happens, you should end up with a quadratic that you might possibly be able to factor. At this level, you probably will be able to factor it. And so what we need to do is find numbers that multiply to negative 3, but add up to a positive 2. So our product is going to be a negative 3, our sum is going to be a positive 2, and we have to find those numbers that multiply to negative 3, but add up to positive 2. And if we look at our clues, our signs are going to be different. So we're going to have one number that's a positive and one number that's a negative. And when we add them together, we have to get a positive 2. So that means that our bigger number is going to be positive. So I'm going to go with a positive 3 and a negative 1. Because 3 is prime, so really we don't have that many options here. All right, so now remember that those are our numbers that are going to end up in parentheses with our variable. So in parentheses, I'm going to have an x plus 3 and an x minus 1, and they're both equal to 0. So now at this point, all we have to do is take each piece, the x plus 3 and the x minus 1, and set them both equal to 0. So x plus 3 equals 0, and x minus 1 equals 0. And now we have these two little mini equations that we can solve. To solve here, I'll subtract 3 from both sides and get x is equal to negative 3. And over here, I'll add 1 to both sides and get x is equal to a positive 1. And those are my solutions. Both of them. All right, so a quadratic equation will usually have two solutions. It doesn't always, there are special cases, but usually you'll have two solutions. So in this case, x is equal to negative 3 and x is equal to 1. We keep both of them. Okay, similarly, we can also solve sometimes if they give it to you, if they give you a quadratic equation in vertex form, sometimes what we can do is actually clean it up like we would if we were solving for x. So in this case, it's already in vertex form. Our goal is to get x by itself, so what I'm going to do is I'm going to go ahead and add 4 to both sides, trying to get x by itself, so I'm breaking up all these pieces. And now I can square root both sides, and so I get x plus 1 is equal to, now when you take the square root of 4, you get both positive and negative 2. And then I can go ahead and subtract 1 from both sides. So I get x is equal to negative 1 plus 2, and x is equal to negative 1 minus 2. And so my answers are a positive 1 and negative 3, just like they were over here when I factored it. All right. Now, this method is very limited. You absolutely have to have it in this vertex form in order to break it up. For our third method, we're going to take a look at solving by graphing. Now for this one, if you think about graphing x squared plus 2x minus 3, it's a quadratic because of that x squared, and so what normally is going to happen is we're going to get some kind of a parabola. Alright, so just to make sure that we're okay with graphing a parabola, or graphing a quadratic, on your calculator, this is probably the fastest way to graph them. You can go ahead and just type in the function, alright, and once we get that in there, we can go ahead and hit enter and it will graph it. Now, at this point, you might be able to see that this parabola actually touches the x-axis in two places. And it looks like it's going to cross at negative 3 and positive 1, which is what we got when we solved. But I can do better than that because it is kind of hard to see. If I go in here and go into my actions, go into my analyze graph menu, I can find the zeros. And so one of them is over here at negative 3, 0. And another one is right about here at positive 1, 0. So on a graph, your solutions are where your your parabola crosses the x-axis. So if you're not comfortable with factoring and you're looking for another method, you can graph the parabola and see where it crosses the x-axis. Now we have to get this parabola onto graph paper. So I'm going to look at my table of values, which would be Control T. And now I'm just going to kind of scroll. I'm going to scroll through and see if I can plot points that are on this graph. So it looks like negative 5, 12 probably isn't going to fit. So I have negative 4, 5. That point I can plot. The next one down is negative 3, 0. And if I keep going, I have negative 2, negative 3. And then I have negative 1, negative 4. And then 0, negative 3. And now if I know anything about parabolas, I know that I'm going to have that symmetry going back up. And so there is the parabola. And my solutions are x is equal to 1 and x is equal to negative 3. All right, so just a different take on solving the quadratic. All right, so the quadratic formula, if we remember back to algebra, we have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And I think that there's probably a song you know that goes along with that. So with this one, we have to make sure we know that what our a, b, and c values are. So a is always going to be the number in front of the x squared. So in this case, it's a 1. B is always the number in front of the x. So in this case, a 2. And c is always the constant term or the number off here by itself. So in this case, it's a negative 3. And then we just plug in. So we get x equals negative b. And then we have plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times a times c, which is our negative 3. Ran out of room there. And then that's all over 2 times a. And so now we just have to go through and clean this up. So to clean it up, I have x equals negative 2. And then I have plus or minus 2 squared is 4. And then minus 4 times 1 is negative 4. Negative 4 times negative 3 is a positive 12. And then that's all divided by 2. So now, if I clean it up even more, I have x equals negative 2 plus or minus 4 plus 12 is 16. So I get the square root of 16 all over 2. And then if we remember, the square root of 16 is 4. So I end up with x equals negative 2 plus or minus 4 divided by 2. And now at this point, I have my positive answer, which is negative 2 plus 4 over 2. And I have my negative answer, which is negative 2 minus 4 all over 2. So negative 2 plus 4 is 2. Divided by 2, that's where our 1 comes from. And then down here I have negative 2 minus 4, which is negative 6, divided by 2, which gives us a negative 3. Now again, you do have your calculators in class, so you could always plug all of that into your calculator and come up with the solutions that way. So at this point we have 3 choices. We have solving quadratics by factoring, we have graphing, and we have the quadratic formula. So one of those ways should make sense to you. It does not matter to me as long as you can solve quadratic equations.